For those of you, I think everybody does know me, I'm James Angel, I'm the broker of Florida Realty and Mortgage. I do welcome everybody here. I'm not going to talk very much this morning. Tony, you want to come over, introduce yourself, and I'll have David come over and he can introduce himself, and I'll let him get started.
Thank you all for coming today to learn a little bit about what the changes are coming about in October. I am with Ameris Bank. I started with them 4 years ago. We started with about $50 million a year in production to $1 billion this year in production. So what I'm going to do is introduce our regional manager, Barry Thompson, and he's going to introduce my team and tell you a little bit about them and what we can do to help you. Now, after the meeting, we're not going to sit there and talk about Ameris Bank and how much we can do to help you and all the products we have. My team will help you with that. They will actually talk to you about all the programs that we have and what we can do to help you grow your business. Barry is going to, and David Heekin are going to teach you some of the changes that you need to know starting October. All right, Mr. Thompson.
So we're not going to talk about Ameris Bank, but I noticed he mentioned it 3 times. Which
yeah, well, I have to know it.
Excuse me. Well, my name, like you said, my name is Barry Thompson. I just joined Ameris Bank. So there we go again. That's pretty good. Yeah. In the spring of this year. Prior to that, I ran the mortgage division for a bank for 18 years, based out of Alabama. Really happy to be here. We're here today to talk about TRID, which is the TILA-RESPA Integrated Disclosure Act. And before we get into that, I'm going to tell you a quick story. Because my first life, I was a realtor. I worked as a real estate agent and a relocation director and a pre- and post-licensed trainer and a branch manager for a large independent real estate company in Birmingham, Alabama. So anytime I get a bunch of realtors in the room, I have to tell my good stories. And I know the last thing I want to do is hear a bunch of old realtor stories, but you got to hear at least one. So I was very young and was having a great time in the real estate business. It was the end of the month, and I had 3 closings that day at the same closing agent. He was like back then, closing agents were almost like, and I'm assuming, knowing David a little bit, sort of the same way. It's almost like your closing agent also needs to be a little entertaining or something. So we had a good one. Name was Courtney Mason, and I had 3 closings with him that day, and the first one was first thing in the morning, and after it was over, he says, Barry, come down the hall. So he said, look, I've hired a new lawyer. He's fresh out of law school. I think he's ready to do a closing by himself. Is it okay if he does your next closing? And I was friends with Courtney. I said, sure, Courtney, that's fine. I have no problem with that. So we sit down to do our closing. Now, the closing agent sits here, and I was the selling agent, so my buyers are sitting here, and then the sellers and their agent. Well, our sellers were divorced. Back up a step. My borrower was the son of the assistant pastor of the church I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama, and he had gone to Bob Jones University. Anybody ever heard of that? Okay. The most conservative institution of any kind in the Western civilized world. Somehow, you can't even date or hold hands there, right? Somehow he managed to find a girl, fall in love with her, and marry her. And they were moving back to Birmingham, Alabama to be school teachers at the Christian school attached to the church that we went to. This girl was so meek and so mild. You're showing her houses, and you say, what do you think about that kitchen? Then you have to tell everybody, quiet down, let's stop the car so we can hear her. She was so soft-spoken, just really mild individual. Sellers are divorced. The husband was living in the house until it sold, had executed a $10,000 second mortgage to his ex-wife, and she was there at closing, which was a bad idea. So the young lawyer walks in, and he sits down, and he passes out settlement statements, and he says, we're going to go over the seller side like they would normally do, and he says, all right, your sales price is $59,900. You've agreed to pay $2,000 of the buyer's closing cost, and we're paying off your second mortgage to your wife of $13,500. And the guy said, hold it. Now his wife's sitting right next to him. He says, I owe her $10,000. And the attorney says, well, she holds the mortgage. We asked for a payoff. She said $13,500. So he turns to her and he says, what the do you think you're doing, you stupid bitch? And just dog cusses her right there in front of her. And, it was, what seemed like 10 minutes, it was really probably 15 seconds, but it was this tirade of profanity like you never heard. And she says, well, my lawyer said you hadn't paid for this yet, and you hadn't paid for this yet, and I'm not signing a thing until I get $13,500. And he says, well, you stupid, and then he just stops. And he looks over at us, he says, I apologize for bringing our personal business into y'all's business. I look at my borrower, and she's crying. The tears are down her face. He stands up, he walks halfway out of the room, he says, you come with me, you stupid. And walks out of the room, and she gets up and leaves with him. Now, we're in shock. We're all shocked. And there's tears now coming down both of my bar. The husband and the wife had big tears. Well, good God. So I'm thinking, what do I do? And nobody says anything for about 2 or 3 minutes. And the closing agent says to the listing agent, what should we do? She says, it'll be okay, I'm sure. Just give him a minute. Well, what seemed like an hour was probably 3 minutes. He walks in and sits down. Doesn't look at anybody, just looks at the table. Just comes in and sits down. She stumbles in a couple of seconds later with her shirt torn and whelps all over her neck. And she grabs this poor lawyer. This is first closing. First closing. She grabs him and says, You're my witness. He says he's going to kill me if I don't sign it. You're a lawyer and you're my witness. And runs out of the room. No, the girl, the woman. Well, now it's like full on, what? I don't know. Later, I find out that she goes to the receptionist, gets at the phone, calls her sister and says, get the kids from the dog. He's going to go crazy. He's going to do something bad. And she hangs up the phone. That's while she's gone. She immediately comes back into the closing room, the conference room, kind of straightens herself up and sits down right next to him. And I don't know what to think, and the lawyer doesn't know what to think, and my buyers are shaking, Because, they're just Bob Jones University, newlyweds, Christian school teachers, right? So we sit there for just a few seconds, and he turns to her and he says, are you going to sign the papers or not, you stupid? She says, I'll do it for $12,000. Now, I have a bizarre sense of humor. I laugh at almost everything. But I didn't laugh yet because I'm thinking, this is really bizarre. He says, fine, $12,000. And she says, I'll do it for $12,000, but you have to apologize. See, y'all are all laughing, right? He says, I'm sorry. She says, no, you have to say it like you mean it. That's when I went, and all of a sudden, all the eyes left him and they were looking straight at me. Oh my God. So, they agreed on $12,000. The lawyer went to go get the HUD changed, and the power went out because of a tornado. We sat there for 2 hours. And here's the worst part of the whole story. About an hour into that, just sitting there for 2 hours, the man says, I have to pee. God, look, I'm from Alabama. I grew up in Alabama, and I know what a redneck is, and this is one of them, right? He's just a redneck, right? He says, I have to pee. And he gets up and leaves. I'm thinking, why do you have to tell us that? You just left. She turns to the listing realtor / best friend and says, why do I still love him so much? It's the God's honest truth. I tell you that story to tell you this. Okay, you guys are in the real estate business. I'm in the real estate business. You sell it, I finance it. This is no mistake. We're all in the same business. And in the real estate business, if you've been in it any length of time, like 33 or 4 years like me, gee whiz, you just better be prepared for stuff to happen. Because something's happening. It doesn't matter what day it is. If you're in the real estate business, there's something going to happen, right? Now we have this happening to us. I feel like some people in the federal government got divorced and they're taking it out. Really, that's kind of what it feels like. So we're here to talk about the TILA-RESPA Integrated Disclosure. Now, who's been to a TILA-RESPA presentation already? Did it take 3 hours and they read you the whole law? We're not doing all that. For God's sakes, do y'all want me to read to you the law? No. I don't want to read it either, all right? What we're going to do is take 15 minutes, talk about the high points, show you the forms, and then talk about the practical effect it'll have on the real estate agent. Because do you care what effect it has on me? I don't think so, right? I'd like for you to care, and there's a slide in here, I'm going to show you how it'll affect me and ask for your, concern, but I know I'm not going to get it. So that's what we're going to do, is talk about TILA-RESPA. It's the Integrated Disclosure Rule, and it does two things essentially to affect the real estate agent. It takes away the good faith, or the good faith 2010 that we now give a borrower, and we now give them a loan estimate in place of that. And we, instead of giving them an initial TIL, which had the APR, it combines it into one thing called the loan estimate. Let's give credit where credit's due. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau has done nothing right since their inception except this one form. Okay? This form is good. I can give this form to a borrower, they can hand it to you, They understand it. You'll understand it. You know, when we did the Good Faith 2010, we had to come up with a whole separate form to send you so you could know what the Good Faith 2010 said. So you could write your contract and have no closing costs. They did away with that. We have a good form. The rest of it is crap, the whole rule. But that's the one thing they did right. So we have the loan estimate. It has to go within 3 days before the time we take the application. There's one twist there. Used to, we could define essentially when an application started, and now the government's defining it for us, which makes our job a little harder, all right? And then the closing statement, which is the closing disclosure, takes place of the settlement statement, the HUD-1 settlement statement for the borrower. It has to be in the borrower's hands 3 full business days before closing. And we'll talk about that in a little while and its practical effect. Okay, here's where I'm going to tell you how bad it can be for me and ask for your sympathy. If we mess up, we have $5,000 per day per violation, $25,000 a day for a reckless violation, and $1 million a day for creating a wanton violation. All right. And here's the problem with the CFPB. If you haven't done any research, used to HUD enforced everything through federal investigations, and there was checks and balances. The CFPB can do anything they want to and levy any fine they want to, and there's absolutely no congressional oversight. There's nothing. Whatever they say is right. You've probably heard people say, we can't even bring you donuts to your office anymore because of this new rule. The rules haven't changed. Section 8 of RESPA is Section 8 of RESPA. It's the CFPB saying this is what we believe it means and changing, kind of moving the bar. So nobody cares about that. So here's what happens. As we said before, the loan estimate combines the good faith and the 20 TIL. The closing disclosure replaces the HUD for the borrower. And the interesting thing about this is nobody cares about the seller. We have all this stuff about borrowers. Nobody cares about the seller. However you want to treat them is fine. There are some exempt transactions, HELOCs, reverse mortgages, and certain no-interest second mortgages. Like if you had a Florida housing product that came out that had a zero-interest second mortgage, it says exempt like that's a good thing, but the fact is what it would mean is we'd have to do a settlement statement in the HUD-1 for that. So it's really, they should have included everything. They forgot. Well, I mean, think about this. You remember Good Faith 2010? Everybody got together in 2009, and there was no place for the borrower to sign the Good Faith estimate. You know why there was no place? They forgot. Right. So they forgot here. You remember the Mortgage Disclosure Improvement Act of 2008 or 9, where if the APR went up an eighth or down an eighth, we had to redisclose and wait 3 days. Even if it went down, and it took them about 6 months to figure out, well, if it went down, it was better for the borrower. We should probably just let them close. You know why that happened? They just forgot. They just forgot. So they do that a lot. This is the federal government for you. Here's the difference in the application. There are 6 pieces: the borrower's name, their monthly income, their social security number in order to obtain credit, their property address, and an estimated value of the property, mortgage loan amount sought. Those 6 things now trigger an application. But here's the kicker. It doesn't matter. Used to, we could say, it doesn't matter what you say you make, you need to prove you make it. It doesn't matter if you tell me the property address, I need to see you've written a contract. Not anymore. If a borrower calls me on the phone and says, I'm John Smith, my social security number is this, I make $1 million a month, I'm buying 123 Happy Street for $150,000 and I want a $120,000 loan, I have an application. Whether it's in writing, whether I have anything to prove anything, I have to disclose now for that borrower, all right? So please tell your borrowers not to tell us property address. I don't want to know his address. I want to know his address when it's real, all right? So, because then we have to start the whole process of disclosing, right? See how fast this is going? This is pretty easy, isn't it? All right. This is the first page, I believe. Does y'all say loan estimate first? Yes, okay. The first page of the loan estimate essentially just gives you details. We have the loan amount, the interest rate, the principal and interest amount, and breaking it down with taxes and insurance and mortgage insurance and estimated closing costs. All right, it's very straightforward unless somebody has some burning question because you've already looked at it before. We'll go to page 2. All right, here's where we look at actual closing details, estimated details. It's separated into several sections you can see. Section A, origination charges. Those are charges that we, the bank, get. Those are charges that come to us. There's zero tolerance for those charges. The second one is services the borrower can shop for. The third one is, cannot shop for. And the third one is services the borrower can shop for. And it totals all of the closing costs. The good news about this, as opposed to the good faith we're using now, is there's a line and a number for every individual charge. Instead of the bank charges are X and hope you can figure out what they are. Now we just tell you what they are. Each one individually, the appraisal, the credit report, the flood cert, there's a line, a description and an amount for every fee. Anybody can understand it, all right? You can use this to write a contract with because you know exactly what's in there and what the fees are going to be. So it's really good. The other thing that's great about it is in the bottom right-hand corner, there's a place for closing costs paid by the seller. So that if the sellers agree to pay $8,000 in closing costs, we now know exactly what the borrower is bringing. Okay, so it's a this form is much better than the current good faith. It's the one good thing about the whole process. The last page is some additional information about the loan, how much principal and interest you'll pay. The one thing that's a little goofy to me on page 30 is at the bottom of the comparisons, it says total interest percentage, which obviously that was not a math major because that's not an interest percentage. It's just kind of bizarre. I don't know who comes up with this. Well, I really do. It's recent college graduates that work for congressmen, but that's a whole other story. So what they're saying is, over the life of the loan, if you make every payment, 69% of your payments will go towards interest. Well, nobody cares about that. That's the stupidest thing I've ever seen. But it's there. But anyway, that's additional information about the loan. It talks about if it's assumable, if there's a fee for prepayment penalties, et cetera, et cetera. The real kicker is page 2. It just looks like an old good faith or an old HUD. It gives you every cost and a description of it. It's a good thing. One interesting thing about the law is we now retain all the liability for the closing disclosure. It says when the lender, whether I prepared or whether the closing agent prepares it, I'm the one that retains all the liability, and I'll tell you that we're preparing it, and I'll tell you that for that in a little while. But it's a little bit of a change. There's also a form in your packet, I think it's the last page, that talks about the closing days. Do y'all have that little graph? Yeah. Okay. So if you look at the graph, it says if you're going to close on Monday and you're going to email the borrower using e-disclosure laws, you're going to have to send it to them on the preceding Thursday. If you're going to use regular mail, we have to send it to them the full week on Monday for the next Monday closing. Well, let's just think about that for just a second. Right now, you get a loan approval. Some people are getting their loans approved at 8 and trying to close them at noon, right? Well, now you're going to get them approved at 8 o'clock on Monday to close noon the following Monday. I said, just let that sink in a little bit, all right? We have to have everything done much quicker, okay? So you see these rules. There's 3 ways to disclose. You can do it in person, you can e-disclose, or you can use regular mail. If you do it in person, I could do it today and close in 3 days. If I do it e-disclosure, I do it Monday or the Thursday before for Monday closing. If I send it regular mail, it's the Monday before a whole week in advance. All right. Save that. That's a page you're going to want to know and have handy. All right. Now, what does that mean? Here's what it means. Who's been to one of these classes and somebody said it's going to take a minimum of 45 days and probably 60 days to close your loan? See it? People say, okay. I'm glad they're saying that, honestly, because it's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. But I think for a mortgage company to stand up in front of a bunch of real estate agents to say that is great for me, right? Here are the facts. I just told you the rules, right? We've always had 3 days to disclose. We had, from the time we had an application. And the only real change in this is I have to have the borrower's closing disclosure out 3 full days before closing. So worst case, how many days should that add to my process? 3. Man, the math really doesn't seem that hard, does it? Okay? Now here's the problem. Some companies have come out and said, we are going to use the mail rule for every step. So if I'm going to mail my initial disclosures, that adds 1 week, because I can send my initial disclosures to you today, and you can sign your intent to proceed today, and we are done. All right? If I wait 3 days and send it to you, I then have to wait 7 more days before I can collect for your appraisal and get the whole process started. So that did add a week. If I then say, I'm going to wait till my loan is approved, which a lot of companies are saying, once the loan is completely approved, I am then going to mail the closing disclosure, then I'm going to have to wait 7 more business days, or 7 days. For the 7 business days, actually, for the mail rule to take account. So I've now added 2 whole weeks minimum to the process. The industry is also assuming that it's going to take some extra time to get everything together. So they're adding a few extra sort of fluff days in there, and that's why they're saying, oh, gee whiz, we used to could close, well, heck, some people can't close loans in 30 days anyway, we know that. But the people who could have said, we can now take a 30-day closing and make it a 6-week closing or a 7-week closing. Well, that's just ridiculous. Here's the way it should work. You get your borrower in the car and you say, you have an email address? And if they say no, go get them. Okay? Because if we can e-disclose for that borrower, we can close in 2 or 3 weeks. If we can't e-disclose for them, we can close in March. That's really what it boils down to. All right, so we need to e-disclose to everybody. It's what year is it? It's 2015. It's 2015. We should be able to e-disclose, right? That's a big key to really help the process along. Our loan officers do their own disclosures. Okay, so if they get an application today, they can disclose right now. They don't have to wait for some disclosure desk somewhere to do it and add 3 or 4 days to the process. 5 or 6 days before every loan closing, we have, I could even bring it up here and show it to you, but we have our loan origination software system has closing dates in it. And there's an automated email that will go out on either the 5th or 6th day before closing to the underwriter and the loan officer and the processor. And it will say, the Bob Smith loan is set to close in 6 days. Is it still closing in 6 days? And those people will respond in the affirmative. And even if we don't have a final clear to close from underwriting, we will send the closing disclosure to the borrower. It's a disclosure. Everybody needs to realize what it is. It is a disclosure. It will go out to the borrower, and then let's say 2 days later, we finally get their last pay stub in or their last TRV or whatever it is. The loan's cleared to close, but it's only 2 days before closing. That's okay, because we sent the disclosures 3 or 4 days ago. Okay? There are ways to mitigate the extra period that everybody's claiming that the world is coming to an end, right? And it's not. It's just not coming to an end. It's manageable. Now, here's what it will take. We're going to send that closing disclosure out 3 days before closing. So what we don't need to know is that we just got the termite letter back today, and we have to have a structural inspection. Okay? We need to make sure we have all the fees appropriate to put on the borrower's closing disclosure 4 or 5 days before closing. Now, that is the tectonic shift in your world.
That is important.
Okay? You think about this. Right now, you wait until you have a final loan approval some people, before they even order an appraisal, for crying out loud. Well, you may just have to take that risk a little bit. Or you wait for the appraisal to come back, or the home inspection to come back before you order the appraisal. Or you wait for this to do that, or you wait for this to do that. You can schedule it however you want to. Just make sure 5 days before closing we know what all the fees are. Quick thing. There's a little bit of a change in the way that the closing disclosure has to read. Currently, if you've ever looked at the Good Faith 2010, and I'm assuming that we do simultaneous issue policies. So, you have the buyer's policy is $500, and for whatever a smaller fee, you have a simultaneous issue lender's policy. And in many markets, I don't know what Jacksonville does, but in many markets, you combine the two and split them, whatever it is, however you pay for that. Sellers and buyers' costs, you agree to split the cost of the title insurance. Well, HUD, in its infinite wisdom in 2009, came in and said, we don't believe that's really what the buyer's cost is. We want you to take the total of the two, subtract what a lender's policy would cost, and that's what we believe the owner's policy is, if you will. Well, nobody cared on the Good Faith 2010 because it really didn't affect the way we closed the loan. Now they've come back and said, that's the way we want it done on the closing disclosure. So it may show a different fee than you've agreed to do with your buyer and seller. And then it gets into, and I'm sure David can talk about this, different state laws and how you can account for that separately on a separate closing statement. So back to the end, we send this closing disclosure out 3 full days before closing, and then another identical one, or one that has the changes that are allowed, will be at closing for them to sign. It also has a place for the seller. On one of the pages for the closing costs, for the actual closing disclosure, has a place for the seller side. I have not talked to a closing agent yet that's going to use it. They can use it by law, but they're not going to use it because, gee whiz, it doesn't really allow them to properly account for where fees go and where they're going to sell them and their software and all that kind of stuff. The seller side has to be done. It does not have to be done on this form. So with that, you want to talk about how that's going to go?
Yeah. Well, the old saying that what rolls downhill, and I've always said the title company's at the bottom of the hill like this. And so there's a lot that Barry's talking about that we don't entirely know how it's going to impact us until we start to get closing disclosures, and Wells may do it a little different than Bank of America or Ameris. We just don't know, but there's a lot of things that are going to definitely change. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the FAR changes to the contract as well. Everybody should find in front of them or somewhere near them one of the new Northeast Florida Association of Realtor contracts. Go ahead and go to page 2 for me, because this is the most important page. And this is where they talk about, and I'm going to we'll start on line 89. This is where they talk about a lot of the TRID changes. Used to be that within a certain number of days, 5 if left blank, that the buyer had to make application for a loan. Now they have to complete the application process. Barry's saying complete the application process to him is those 6 things. I guess that's going to be the same for everybody else in theory.
You know, I haven't talked to any like NAR or state association lawyers yet. My assumption is, since the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau says that's an application, then that makes it an application. That doesn't do you guys any good, because just if you've got a listing and the buyer says, I've made application, all they've done is call somebody and told them something. But by law, I'm guessing that's what it's going to be.
Yeah. So here's the gotcha for your buyers, and where you have to be really careful if you're on the buyer's side. They have to completing the application process in 5 days isn't such a big deal. Heck, they don't even need to give a contract. They just need to call and give them an address. The problem is on line 91, where it says buyer will pay for the appraisal at the earliest date allowed by law. I'm guessing what they meant at the NEFAR Forms Committee was that they will pay for it within 3 days of the loan estimate going out.
All right, so I'll have to go back and review the law. If it's the same as the Good Faith 2010, once we give the borrower, they make application, we have to disclose by them on the 3rd day. They then have, I believe, 7 days to shop before we can force them to pay for anything. So that might give them a 10-day window by law. Right?
Okay. And I don't know if that's true or not.
Yeah, and that was the rules based on the Good Faith 2010,
And you're not alone, because there's not a loan officer that I have asked in this town, what does that mean, that didn't go like this?
I haven't thought about it until you just read it. I didn't know that was going to be a rule. So.
With a question with that, you're saying 3 days they have to pay for it. What are you going to do with people that are first-time home buyers, USDA, and ship people?
Exactly. What are you going to do? Another unintended consequences of this contract. I've got an even better one for you. What if your buyer's buying a house that they're a little shaky on? Hey, I want to get my inspections done first. Now they got to spend $400 for an inspection, $400 for an appraisal, possibly not buy the house. So I'll give you a little workaround for that. But this is, we got to be careful. Anytime you have new law, new things coming out like this, there's going to be some gotcha moments. And they bolded it. They bolded this, which means they really want to bring it to your attention. And already we get calls all the time from a seller that says, I want to keep this binder deposit because I don't think this buyer diligently pursued their loan approval. And that's always been one of those, hey, sure, let's put it in front of a judge, see what they say. Now they've gone so far as to bold it and state in line 93, otherwise buyer is in default. So you're going to have a bunch of smart sellers going, give me proof that you ordered that appraisal 3 days, within 3 days of the earliest date allowed by law. It just is, the workaround that I suggest for that, especially in cases where your buyer wants to get their inspections done first, is state in the contract, or if you have a standard in that you use, somewhere something to the effect of, notwithstanding anything contained in this contract, the buyer does not have to order the appraisal for X number of days, 15 days after date of acceptance, or until buyer is satisfied with the results of his inspections. There are ways that you can get around that. And they're going to be looking, the buyer's going to be looking to you all for guidance on things like this. So keep that in mind when you're talking to your buyer and say, hey, are you prepared to order your appraisal right away? Because chances are they may have already gotten the loan estimate from Ameris a week before they even have a signed contract.
Yeah, I was wrong. Somebody did care about the seller. Whoever wrote that contract, that's amazing, yeah.
Yes? About, the language? I would say something like, notwithstanding anything contained in this agreement, buyer is under no obligation to order the appraisal until, and then it can be 15 days after date of acceptance. It could be until buyer is satisfied with the results of his inspections, her inspections, its inspections, whatever. Yes, sir.
Can I ask something?
That's up to 3 days and add 14 days on there?
You can, but then when you start scratching in here and changing things, it's better just to go to that paragraph 17 or 18, and then you could write, line 92 has changed. There's really a bunch of ways you could skin it. I've already been asked by a couple of real estate companies that we do a lot of work for to change their standard addendum. A lot of them have standard addendums that they give to the buyer that's got a bunch of stuff already that alters these contracts. They've already asked me to change their standard addendum to just make that standard language. So I'll get with James and say, I don't know if you all do that.
Yes, please.
Okay. It never hurts. They can order it whenever they want, but it never. Okay, so continuing on line 92, it says instruct the lender, and the buyer will instruct the lender to order the appraisal within 3 days after time of such payment. Otherwise, buyer is in default. So again, that's just a real big gotcha for your buyers to watch out and make sure they're okay with a timeline like that. And if they're not, because they want to do their inspections first or whatever, that's where you just got to get with them and coordinate that and make sure that that is changed. Otherwise, they're in default. If they don't do all these things within the 3-day period or whatever of getting this loan estimate, which is going to come fast and furious, faster maybe than it used to. Line 96 and 97. This, you may not be aware this is in here, Barry, but this is not in the FAR contract. I don't know if it's in Alachua's, but this says that buyer authorizes the buyer's lender, so Maris in this case, to provide the closing attorney and the buyer's agent with a copy of the closing disclosure at the same time they give it to the buyer.
I just got the email this morning that said our lawyers have told us it doesn't matter who signs that, we're not doing it.
Can't do it. Okay.
We'll be giving it to you, or the borrower, and they can give it to you and whoever else. Right?
Okay. So the point of this, I guess, was probably so that we could all get it at the same time from Ameris, and then pick up the phone and call that buyer and say, hey, open up your email. Hit the send button, resend it, let's get this thing going.
Well, it makes perfect sense, but
Yeah.
We decided that it opens up liability with the CFPB.
Yep.
Consumer Financial Protection Laws. Everybody leaves here with one thing. She just said, oftentimes, the closing agent, the borrower, the agent and the lenders don't communicate. If you don't start communicating, it will take 2 months to close a loan.
Yeah.
That's the only reason we're here is to tell you, please communicate. The minute you know what a fee is going to be, the minute you know who the borrower's going to use for their homeowner's insurance, the minute you have got to tell them.
Relationships are going to be more important than ever. Relationship with a good lender and relationship with a good title company that hopefully you're able to steer if you have the buyer that close. Relationships are going to be very important. Again, it's going to be important that you all help your borrowers who don't know who to go to. They saw a commercial for the Stagecoach and thinks, I'm going to go there and get my loan. It is going to put the pressure on the title company. We are the amount of work that we have to do faster and upfront is just like them is going to be never before. So much of our work is going to be front loaded. We maybe hiring extra people. I don't know how we're ready for it. I have a big staff. I have 28 total people in my office, including 7 attorneys. We're ready. We're nimble. We're able to adjust. But I don't know. I may go from my processor. We have processors that process the file from time you give us a contract till closing. We have closers and post closers. Maybe a processor can handle 40 to 45 right now a month. May go down to 30. I may be hiring an extra processor. I don't know how this is going to impact us yet, but we're ready to figure it out. 113 on the next page, the closing, which the people at the federal government that were getting divorced decided to rename it a consummation. And we're going to draw the blinds and dim the lights in the conference room. So, line 124 talks about the extension of the closing date, and it's extended for up to 10 days if required for CFPB delivery of necessary documents, blah, blah, blah. So there is a built-in allowance in NEFAR and FAR for extending the closing date if we're needing to redisclose things. That we don't recommend having to use it, and you still run up on a seller saying, well, you know what, I disagree with that because I don't think that buyer made a continuing and diligent effort to get his loan. But you still run into problems. We don't want to have to rely on it, but they put that in there. There was already language in there from the old TILA rules about 7 days. So there is a little bit of play if we have a problem and need to redisclose. But again, the takeaway from this is work with a good lender. Work with a good title company. You won't have these problems. And be diligent with your borrower to be in constant contact. How are you doing? Are you getting everything done that you need to get done? You know, are you following the steps that you need to take to make sure this closes on time? That's really it that changed in the contract as far as dealing with TRID issues. Okay. There's also a 3-page handout on your chair about the changes to the FAR contract. And shuffle papers. Okay, I did not print the FAR contract. What I did was just print the 3-page because they had a nice summary. Thank you. Nice summary of the changes for you. So basically, they did the same thing in the financing contingency that NEFAR did. They didn't put in language about those strict timelines about you have to order appraisal, you have to, but they did change to add in extending the closing date if they need to for CFPB disclosures. In paragraph 9, and Barry mentioned this earlier, about title insurance and how the federal government says one size fits all. Alabama, we don't care how you did it, Florida, Michigan, y'all are all different. This is how everybody's doing it. And so the FAR contract did say title insurance premium charges for the owner's and any lender's policy will be calculated and allocated in accordance with Florida law, but may be reported differently on certain federally mandated closing disclosures or other closing documents. So that's to kind of cover us to say, hey, I have to disclose it this way here, but that's not really how it happened. Here's how we calculate it. I can tell you that we're not going to use the closing disclosure as the settlement statement. You're going to be signing, there will be an extra document that's signed. We're going to have, it's not going to be called the HUD-1 anymore, but we're going to have a document signed as well because we need to calculate closing costs that may not be on here that are allocated to the seller. And we need to be able to sync with our closing software and do things like cut checks. And my closing software is not going to sync with Ameris' closing disclosure software or any other lenders. It's just not going to do that. So we'll continue to do our own form of settlement statement that may disclose things a little bit different. The numbers will be the same, but it may shuffle around where things are paid. That's really it. Does anybody have any questions for me about contracts or anything? Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
I hope this was informative.
Yes.
That's good. I want to thank everybody for attending. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to see David or Tony or any of the other reps, and they'll answer any questions. Thank you guys.
Thank you all for coming.